Cody Stamann versus Brian Kelleher takes place this weekend on the prelims of UFC 250 Nunes versus Spencer, and I must say, I'm really excited for this bout. It's on the prelims, which I will never understand. It's not even headlining the prelims, which is another thing that I'll never understand, but even still, I'm more excited for this bout than I am for Nunes versus Spencer, and Nunes versus Spencer is the main event of the main card of the pay-per-view. You know, Cody Stamann versus Brian Kelleher is a really good matchup. I really like it. It's going to tell us a lot. Once we find out the results of this fight, we're going to learn a lot about both Brian Kelleher and Cody Stamann, because Brian Kelleher is a really tough challenge for Cody Stamann, and there's a lot of intangibles going into this fight as well, which we're going to get to in a second. But Brian Kelleher, this is going to tell us a lot about him. Is he good enough to join the rankings? Is he good enough to make a run towards the title at this late age of his early 30s, when you're just starting to dip out of your prime? Not a lot of guys can make a run towards a title shot in their late 30s or mid 30s unless their name is Tony Ferguson, because Tony Ferguson is just that type of guy. But for Brian Kelleher, it's now or never in his career to really make a statement and make a run towards that belt, and he's chosen to do it against Cody Stamann, which is not a good matchup for him whatsoever. And if he does win this one, there's a big fight between him and Sean O'Malley on the line. But for Cody Stamann, he gets a chance to prove to us how good he is, because I think that Cody Stamann is a guy in this division that could beat the Jimmy Riveras. You know, that could easily be top 7, top 5. I'm sure not a lot of people would argue with me there. He's only lost to Aljamain Sterling in the entire division. And by the way, in that fight where he lost to Aljamain Sterling, he got caught with a weird submission that no one could have ever seen coming. In fact, it only happened twice that night. Actually, he should have seen it coming. He really should have seen it coming, because it happened twice in a row that night. But even still, it was a weird submission. All credit to Aljamain Sterling, but Cody Stamann was doing good in that fight and was kind of hanging in there with one of the top contenders and someone who a lot of people think should be fighting for the title right now in Aljamain Sterling. He was hanging in there against him. He made it a competitive fight. He's a great grappler, a great wrestler. And to be a great wrestler against a guy like Aljo shows how great you really are. I feel as though Cody Stamann's going to put on a statement. I think he's going to make an easy win of this, 30-27 every single round. I just think there's going to be an inherent wrestling advantage for Cody Stamann. He can push the pace harder as well. When I first saw this fight announced, I thought Cody Stamann had taken this on short notice. And let's talk about that whole aspect of this fight, because Brian Kelleher has fought at featherweight before. He just fought at featherweight only a few weeks ago against Hunter Azure. He's now turning around to fight at featherweight again. I will say this. I don't know what doctor authorized Brian Kelleher to fight again this soon, but he did not get out of that Hunter Azure fight with no damage. If you think that none of those kicks to the legs that Hunter Azure was throwing against Brian Kelleher, none of those punches are going to leave any kind of bone ache inside Brian Kelleher, just because he wasn't concussed doesn't mean that he should then be able to fight 2 weeks later. Like, I was all in favour of Kevin Holland fighting a few weeks later, because he literally took no shots whatsoever and finished the fight within about 30 seconds. With Brian Kelleher, he went through 2 rounds of getting beaten up to then land a one-punch KO and get it all over and done with. For him to be turning around this quickly, I do worry a little bit, and I will say this about Cody Stamann. I thought at first he was taking this fight on short notice, then I remembered, and by the way, I picked him to win this fight on the condition and knowing and thinking that he was taking this fight on short notice, which shows you how confident I am in picking Cody Stamann here. I picked him when I thought he was taking this fight on a few weeks' notice, just because I assumed that he was going to be in shape. Cody Stamann was supposed to be fighting Raoni Barcelos at UFC Columbus. Raoni Barcelos is an absolute savage. Cody Stamann's had that full camp. He'd never got to fight, and now he's translating it over to this next one with Brian Kelleher. I like Cody Stamann's chances even more, because the one chance I gave Brian Kelleher of winning this one was being more adjusted to featherweight, which is going to be a big deal. Cody Stamann hasn't fought at featherweight ever, I don't believe, and if he has, and he hasn't done it for a long time, and has definitely never done it inside the UFC as far as I can remember. Brian Kelleher has, and he's just done it, so he's going to be more used to the weight class. But I also was kind of worried about picking Stamann, because I thought Kelleher's had a full camp. He just showed that he had finishing power in the end of the fight. In the last round of the fight, he has finishing power. He's got a great gas tank. If Cody Stamann is not quite in peak condition and shape, he could gas out trying to go too hard in the wrestling in the first 2 rounds, and then Kelleher might be able to come back in the later half of the fight. But Stamann had a full camp for Raoni Barcelos, and Raoni Barcelos He's a savage. So that kind of shows me where Stamann's mindset is. Because if I'm Cody Stamann right now, and I've just got robbed of a win against Song Yadong, because, you know, it's Song Yadong, decisions and Song Yadong don't really work out too well together, to be honest with you, since his last fight with Vera. But even still, he went to a draw with Song Yadong. He could easily have sat there and complained and said, no, I want a top contender. I won the fight against Song Yadong. I took on the young, hungry up-and-comer like you told me to. And I came out on top, in my opinion, even though the judges robbed me. I want to take on a guy up the rankings. But no, he said, I'll take on Raoni Barcelos. That tells me where his mindset is. If you're a guy who's just come off a draw that you think you should have won, and you're ranked in a division, and you're looking at Raoni Barcelos, if that's how you pronounce it, at Raoni Barcelos for an opponent, you're on some different mindset right now. I think Cody Stamann is under the assumption that he is so much better than these guys that he should be able to beat them. So he's not going to be the guy who's going to be picking and choosing opponents that look good for him and are going to move him up the rankings. He is so sure of himself that he's one of the best in the division, which I believe he is as well, that he's willing to risk it all against these young, hungry up-and-comers. Not really young, but Raoni Barcelos is a newcomer in the UFC. Brian Kelleher has had this new resurgence in the UFC as well. Stamann was willing to take these guys on. That tells me where his mindset is at. I think he's going to win this bout. Brian Kelleher is very, very, very dangerous. I think the stand-up advantage, in terms of finishing ability, is going to go to Brian Kelleher. In terms of strict stand-up, I think we're looking at Cody Stamann out-striking Brian Kelleher in many moments in this fight. However, again, with that finishing ability, you know, we've seen enough Tyron Woodley fights. Darren Till's the more credentialed striker than Tyron Woodley, but Tyron Woodley has Tyron Woodley's hands and arms that have a lot of power in them, so he can make up for a lot of things. We saw it like Wonderboy is the more credentialed and better striker than Tyron Woodley on paper, but Woodley's got that power, so that's what we're kind of looking at here. Stamann's going to be a bit cleaner, a little bit crisper as well. Kelleher's going to be more adjusted to the weight class. He's probably going to be the naturally bigger guy as well, because now he knows he's fighting at featherweight. Cody Stamann was supposed to be fighting at bantamweight before this whole sneezing worldwide went on, which now apparently is over since the protest, but I said the word, I'm going to get demonetized. Fuck. Either way, what was I saying? Cody Stamann thought he was fighting at bantamweight, and now he's found out, oh, it's at featherweight. Brian Kelleher had that against Hunter Azure, where he found out it was now at featherweight, and now that he knows it's at featherweight, I'm sure he's going to bulk up a little bit in these few weeks that he does have to adjust himself to that weight class. There's some pretty important points to mention. I just feel as though the wrestling advantage for Cody Stamann is going to be too much, and the experience of Cody Stamann. I know Brian Kelleher is a veteran, but Cody Stamann went 19-1 as an amateur. Doesn't say that on Tapology, but if you do your digging, he went 19-1 as an amateur, and I saw that on Wikipedia, which could be manufactured, but I'm willing to believe that he at least had a very long amateur career. If someone is willing to say that he went 19-1, I'm going to at least assume that maybe he at least went 15-2. Even still, he's had a lot of amateur fights. He's known he wanted to do this for a living. He's only lost to Aljamain Sterling in the UFC. Has beaten everyone else. I think he's going to win against Brian Kelleher. There couldn't be a worse matchup. You've got a guy diving for your legs non-stop. He's a better wrestler than you. He was a Division 2 wrestler in college, but that doesn't really mean much to me, to be honest with you, because Kamaru Usman was a D2 wrestler, and we saw how that worked out. No one is ever as good as they are when they were at that moment when they were only competing in wrestling. Cody Stamann's going to win this bout. He's a better wrestler. Kelleher's a power puncher. Doesn't work out for me. You got Brian Kelleher, who's going to be looking for the KO on the feet, swinging wild, maybe going for some takedowns of his own, which I just don't see him getting. So I'd rather, if I was Brian Kelleher, I'd be telling him to stay on the feet, keep this standing, and knock out Cody Stamann. When your objective is to knock someone out, because in my opinion, Kelleher can't win a decision, his objective is to knock someone out. That's how I would imagine his camp is sounding right now. We're going to keep this on the feet. We're going to catch him when he gets tired in the later rounds. And we're going to put him out cold. That sounds like a perfect game plan for Brian Kelleher. You got a guy swinging wild hooks in Brian Kelleher. You got a guy looking for takedowns in Cody Stamann. Kelleher's going to be off balance. He's going to be overthrowing shots. Stamann's going to be ducking under him and taking him down. And I think we could see that going on for about 3 rounds, 30-27 each round, just getting the better of him in the grappling situations. Maybe even getting a submission at one point as well, because we did see that Montel Jackson was able to get a submission against Brian Kelleher. However, Brian Kelleher did get rocked before that submission, so maybe we can't judge his submission defense while he's concussed, because, you know, it's pretty hard to defend submissions when you don't know what fucking day it is. Let's be real. Brian Kelleher is very good. I hope he wins this fight. I'm rooting for Brian Kelleher. I don't think he's going to get it done. Cody Stamann's a little bit too crisp. I think here's what it really comes down to. I think Cody Stamann could at some point in his career make top 5. I'd be very confident claiming that Cody Stamann at some point in his career is going to make top 5. He's taken way less damage than Brian Kelleher. He's taken way less damage recently than Brian Kelleher. Way less damage recently. He has better wins than Brian Kelleher. He's beaten guys that I think that Brian Kelleher would maybe lose to. I think Cody Stamann's got this one in the bag, and he's in his prime. And he's younger. And he's got a better record. I just don't see it going Brian Kelleher's way. His game plan doesn't seem to be one that's going to work against a guy who wants to take him down. In my opinion. But, you know. Cody Stamann's had a full camp. Brian Kelleher, getting a bit old. He's had some KOs in his career. He's had his losses here and there. He's been concussed a few times. I even feel as though I wouldn't be surprised if I saw Cody Stamann rock him at some point in this fight. I think that Cody Stamann can be top 5. I don't think that Kelleher can. That's what I'm going for. However, I'm rooting for Brian Kelleher because I really, really, really want to see Sean O'Malley versus Brian Kelleher, because his call-out after he fought Hunter Azure, and I'm assuming his call-out, if he does win this one as well, is going to be directed at Sean O'Malley again. That's going to sell some money. Sean O'Malley versus Brian Kelleher is a better main event of a pay-per-view than Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer. Period. I don't want to hear any arguments. Sean O'Malley, Brian Kelleher, as the main event of a pay-per-view, will sell more pay-per-views than Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer. Done. I'm looking forward to it. I'm really rooting for Brian Kelleher, so boom, boom, if you're watching this, rub that bald head of yours, give it a good little shine, have it a little bit lucky for yourself, you know? Maybe make a nice little wish. I hope you win this one, but Cody Stamann is a beast and very underrated and maybe one of the dark horses of the division. So I don't think you're going to win. But I'm rooting for you, Kelleher. So good luck. We'll see what happens. And if Cody Stamann wins this one, I don't think he's going to be looking for a fight with Sean O'Malley. I think he's probably going to be looking for a fight with Jimmy Rivera. He's probably going to be looking for a fight with the loser of Sandhagen versus Sterling. He's at a different point in his career than Brian Kelleher is. If Brian Kelleher wins this fight, he'll be new to the rankings. He'll probably look to take one more on, and then he'll look for his jump up. Cody Stamann's already taken the one more. He's already been in the rankings. He's looking above him after this one. I like his mindset, taking on these contenders without a damn. I'm looking forward to the fight. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button there. Cody Stamann is going to win this one by decision. He's going to have a lot of close attempts at a finish by submission, but he won't eventually get it because I believe that Brian Kelleher's veteran status is going to be able to keep him out of danger, but not get him the win. He can keep himself out of danger, but he can't keep himself off the canvas. That's my prediction. 30-27, Cody Stamann wins every round. Click that again there. Goodbye.